So I wondered what would happen if I invited many of the people who have inspired me the most in the last 20 years to be in the same room together. And it's happening. And it seems better than I thought and scarier than I thought. So I thought this fall might be a good time to have a midlife crisis. And as a part of that, I thought it would be nice to invite you all here to witness it. And as a way to support kind of listening for what I'm learning most in this transition period, which, midlife crisis would be one frame of it, but listening for what is next or where I'm called to kind of have more impact on what I'm doing. So thanks for being a part of that. You might have noticed I'm wearing a bike helmet and a safety vest, which was my wife's idea. For one, public speaking can be scary and dangerous. But also, I want to start with a visual illustration of the topic I want to talk about, which is the reason for the bike helmet and safety vest. So the topic I want to talk about, I know I've been kind of elusive about it in any invitation, is about moving beyond the cult of self-development. And to start that, I want to do a visual illustration that kind of illustrates some of that, but I also thought it might be fun and help me kind of help us get started. I also said in the invitation, I think, that if you're willing to lift heavy objects, that would be useful. So it's not required of everybody, but here's what I'm going to do. In about 30 seconds, I am going to jump off this chair, like straight. And my hope is that there will be a bunch of people right here to catch me, and then I will move around on top of them. And it worked best if there's like a dense cluster of people there with their hands above their heads.
Now, is this the heavy object he was talking about?
He doesn't look that heavy.
No, he doesn't.
Get close, get close, get close. No gaps.
What's his vertical like? How far?
Okay.
Spin him.
I don't have a plan for what's next. Slowly now. Thank you. A little dizzy. So we might come back to that metaphor of that kind of willingness to leap off and be carried by community. So I am an earnest man. It's embarrassing sometimes. So recently my family and we were having dinner and talking about what's something unique about each person in our family. And my daughter Grace, who I won't point out anywhere, she's 8, and she said, well, Daddy, one thing that's unique about you is that you like to try to improve people's personalities. Which was painful. And it's true. that I really like to try to improve my personality. I like to try to improve all of your personalities. I like to especially try to improve my kids' personalities, which can be pretty annoying for some people and sometimes. And in a broader sense, I love self-development. So like things that might help me or other people be better, happier, I'm kind of a junkie for that. Lots of ways. So I'm a part of a men's group. Some of those men here tonight. We do long check-ins, support each other to keep growing personally. I love personality type kind of things, especially like to guess someone else's personality type, which you're not supposed to do. I like to make lists of shadows I see in myself and then try to acknowledge those and incorporate them into who I am. Like all those things, and find them really valuable. And sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in a cult of self-development that's hard to get out of, that I help build myself. And sometimes it feels like I, and maybe sometimes others, make self-development an idol that's more important than anything else, that blinds us to other things. And it can become like a religion where there's different rituals to support that idol. And I love self-development, to clarify, but sometimes feel stuck in that trap. So last year, several of us here were part of a large social innovation lab event that I helped organize. And I invited a colleague to come, and invited lots of colleagues, many of you. And this colleague afterwards said, that innovation lab thing, it wasn't a fit for me or for my business because it seemed like it was mostly about self-esteem, which was confusing to me because I thought it was about practically finding ways to support projects that are trying to make the community a better place. And along the way, we were doing some self-reflection, some movement, and some yoga, but that was just helping things along. But this colleague also said that at times, the language that we used in our group of us leading this was vague and alienating. And he didn't say it sounded like a cult, but I think part of what I interpreted at least was that there was a challenge that's kind of like a navel-gazing cult here that's more about feeling good than about making change in the world. And I, as I was saying, really believe in the integration of personal change, community change, systemic change. And I think this colleague was quite a helpful mirror for me, at least, that I sometimes am so focused on that self-development that I miss lots of other things. And like I'm a part of a cult. Another shadow side to me of that real tight focus on self-development is the anxiety that comes for me, and I think for a lot of us, of always feeling like we need to be improving ourselves. So my father is in a nursing home in Missouri, and he's been severely depressed for the last many years. And he doesn't get out of bed unless he's forced to get out of bed. And what he thinks about, I think, pretty much all the time, is how he should be a better father, better husband, better Christian, better contributor in society. And he lives in a kind of personal hell that just never leaves that thought about how he needs to be better. And I'm not depressed, but I know that kind of stuckness that comes from fixating on always trying to be better and getting stuck and paralyzed by that. But as my wife knows, I don't care too much about making a lot of money or getting a lot of stuff, which is sometimes a problem. But what I do care a lot about is trying to be more spiritually evolved than the next guy. That I'm maybe not a materialist, but I think I'm a spiritual materialist. That I often slip into the belief and action that if only I do just enough meditation, therapy, and small groups and everything else, then finally I'll become a better person. Finally I'll find some peace. Finally I'll be able to contribute what I need to in society. Another shadow side of focusing narrowly on self-development for me is failing to see systems and structures in society that impact us no matter how personally evolved we are. So from this narrow grasping of self-development, we might notice, right, there's massive income inequality. Right, there's climate change happening. Right, our country is sending drone attacks across the world. And then we might focus mostly on our own personal experience and relationship to those. So we might really take on the mental and emotional weight, and I might and do, of the privilege we have in those systems. We might do things to take personal actions to feel better about who we are and our integrity. We might buy a Prius, as I did earlier this year. We might go to lots of workshops about race and class privilege. We might do things to work on our physical and our somatic relationship to those issues. But from within that cult, and all those things I think are great things, but from within that cult, I think we can become paralyzed by focusing so much on that personal level of systemic change that we don't feel the power to actually change the causes of those conditions. And, like my daughter was pointing out at the beginning, that if I'm always focused on what could be better about her or anyone, I'm probably not noticing how amazing she is right now. A couple of years ago, I went on a retreat at Afton State Park by myself. And I was walking through the woods, and it was a snowy day, but it was really clear. Like there was snow on the ground, it was clear. I was walking up a hill, and halfway up the hill, I felt physically stopped by a realization. The realization was that I'm probably not going to get much better. Wow. That I've been doing contemplative practices for 20 years. It's an important part of my life, but if I sit in silence for a minute, my mind still races off to my to-do list, and the next time I can eat food, check my email, and have sex. And I've been married for 15 years and working really hard all those years to be a kind and loving husband. And I'm still an impatient jerk, way more than I would like to be, including, 2 days ago? Probably today, too. So as I was on that hill at Afton State Park, I was disappointed. I wasn't gonna, oh, shoot, that's not gonna work. That's my plan, what else have I got? But also relieved, oh, right, I could give up some of that striving. I could let go of some of that and have a lot more energy. On focusing on how I can be a part of something bigger and not just always trying to be a better person or trying to get you to be a better person. And for many people, religion is a main way to move beyond ourselves, to surrender to service, community, God. And for a lot of my life, being a part of the faith community has been very important to me. I've been a part of Quaker meetings for the last 18 years. But earlier this year, I stepped back, and my family stepped back from the Quaker meeting that we helped start 10 years ago. And we're in a kind of transition period where we don't have a clear, this is our identity and home. There's still very important relationships to us, to that meeting, to other churches, to a Buddhist center, to interfaith groups, secular groups, but as it seems to me for lots of us these days, there's not one simple answer of okay, that's who I am, it's my accountability, that's what I surrender to. That it often feels like we have to make up our own spiritual community, and often I think we do it through the lens of self-development, what could be better about us and how can we find things to help us do that. And I get tired of not only in relationship to the spiritual community, but that sense of always trying to be better to create things myself. So I was talking with my friend Janet recently, where the idea for this talk came out of that conversation. And we were talking about, so if I am in a cult, how do I get out of the cult? And Janet said, well, normally in a cult, as I remember it, you first tell the truth about the power it has over your life. Acknowledge the ways it's an illusion. And then maybe you can find people that have gotten out of the cult. Hang out with them, learn from them. So a lot of what I want to do tonight is acknowledge, confess, I'm in a cult. It feels that way. I don't want to get rid of the self-development, but I want to get rid of that narrow grasping at it, let it go. Richard Rohr wrote a book called Falling Upward. Some of you have read. It's about the second half of life. And I'm 42.8 years old, which is statistically a little more than halfway through life. And in the book, Richard Rohr says, the first half of life often is about building up our sense of self, who we are. The second half of life can be about letting go and surrendering. So I think it's time to let go and surrender. And this might be cheesy, but I like to be cheesy sometimes. That I want to see tonight as kind of like a wedding. That I got married at a wedding 15 years ago and had fun, so I thought, well, I could do it again. In the sense of making a public commitment at that time, it was a public commitment to Jenny, to love her for the rest of my life. But I want to publicly commit to letting go and surrendering to life. And I feel some embarrassment that I don't know fully what that means. I have some sense of hints that I'll describe. But mostly what I want to do is confess that and ask for your help in helping shape what that is. And would love to be on that journey with you. And by that, I'm not talking about denying what I want or what I feel, which I've done a lot of in my life, which has come out in pretty sideways, harmful ways. Good to have a testimony. Saw some head nods there. But I want to welcome boldness and challenge and gusto in surrender and letting go. Not a kind of passivity, but a kind of taking responsibility for surrender and letting go. It's being used by life. When I was a kid, I went to lots of church camps and youth groups. And I had a lot of those events. There's people that got baptized. And usually it's a one-time thing. You get baptized once, that does it. But I got baptized at least 2 or 3 times, maybe more. Because there's a lot of pressure, it's the climax. We're building up to this. And now that I'm outside of more of a formal church context, I still crave that kind of ritual to surrender into and be supported by community. And I see tonight as one experiment, and what could that look like outside of that context? How do we all create those kind of rituals? So our life is not just all about a narrow sense of ourselves. It's not that I expect to be all surrendered and peaceful and equanimous if I choose to let go. But rather I recognize that I tend to be pretty narrow and selfish by nature. And I need help of commitment and community to come back to that letting go. And so my addiction, one of my addictions of many addictions, is self-development. And I'm guessing all of us have our own kind of addictions. Yours might not be self-development. To ways to cling narrowly to who we think we are. And what would it really mean if I was less always trying to improve myself and more focused on surrender and letting go? I don't know. But some clues for me are, in terms of what that is and what it's called and looks like, is I think it has many names. So my friends at 12-step groups call it turning our lives over to a higher power. People I work with who work with networks, we talk about that shift from working just as individuals or one organization to working on behalf of a whole network being used by that community. It's my theory, you friends. We talk about letting go and letting come. Muslim friends have reminded me that the word Muslim means to surrender to our will to God. And those of us into Jesus might remind each other about letting go into death and resurrection. So I think there's many ways to name it, and I'm not focused primarily on the naming, but the actual shift. And I'm not talking about a few new practices or tools to bring into my toolkit to try to get better, but about a fundamental reorientation. To always be looking for where the life is, what is moving towards wholeness, as I was just talking about with Russell beforehand, and being committed to let go and follow that, to receive the grace that comes from that. Several years ago, I was leading a workshop about nonviolence for a group of young adults. It's part of my job back then. And the night before I did this workshop, I made this new anagram of the word peaceful. So each letter spelled out some what I thought was just brilliant principle for applying active nonviolence in our lives. And I just felt breakthrough. I have finally mastered how to do this in a way that they're going to get. It's going to be so hands-on. So I went then to the actual workshop with the group, and turns out they didn't think it was brilliant. In fact, it seemed to inspire their love of violence. I felt like a total failure and fraud. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm a terrible messenger of nonviolence. I'm giving it kind of the milquetoast version and quitting. And that evening, I happened to go to this meeting that's a part of a Quaker tradition, something called elder committees. And the idea is if someone's doing some work in the world with some spiritual foundation or aspiration, that you meet with these people that help ground that foundation and provide challenge and questions and prayer. And this evening, I happened to be meeting with a group like that, and I told the story what a fraud I was. And one of the couple people that was there, she heard my story, and she said, "You might be right. You maybe are a fraud." Which was totally not what I wanted to hear. And she said, "You might be a fraud, but the message of nonviolence is not fraudulent. And the community that you're representing, we're not necessarily as bad as you." She didn't say it quite like that. And she said, "Get over it, learn from it, go do it again, come back to us. We got your back." And what this group did with me, it felt like physically that night, was that I was focused on am I worthy? Am I worthy to do this? And they picked me up and shifted my orientation from am I worthy to am I willing? And I needed to be picked up and moved over there. And that's the shift I'm talking about, moving from focusing on my worthiness to being willing to be used by life. So in a surrender to life, publicly declare my surrender to four things. I don't have a 4-point here's how I'm going to do it, but 4 intentions I want to surrender to. So the first is to the source of life, surrendering to the source of life. Second, surrendering to community, surrendering to you. The third, surrendering to the transformation of systems. And the fourth, surrendering to the humor and lightness and strangeness in life. So I see surrendering to the source of life when I hear the awe in Myron Lowe's voice when he talks about how he came from the stars. I see surrendering to the source of life in the ways Wendy Morris welcomes creativity to move through her and makes up some kind of movement to honor what's happening in the room. I see it in Tom Allen's relating to his wife's Alzheimer's as a spiritual teacher. I see it in how the Visitation Sisters treat everyone who comes to their door as Christ. I see it in the way sitting in silence and imagining Jesus next to me melts what's rigid in me. I see it in how deeply Emily Jarrett Hughes welcomed love and prayer and healing from cancer. And I want to surrender to community, which I see in the ways you held me up in the crowd surfing. I see it in the ways that Joel Hodroff forms yet another men's group because he knows that will bring joy to a friend. I see it in how Jenny Larson gives herself in caring for her father. I see it in the ways Mary Whitney shares her own story of transformation as a resource for others. I see it in the way Russ Ballinger builds community with police officers and people coming out of gangs. And how Alec Neal and his parents boldly welcome love in corporate headquarters. And I want to surrender to being used in the transformation of systems, which I see in how Bruce Peterson pilots new collaborative ways of doing court, and how Ann Gomez flips the power dynamic of translation and community gatherings in immigrant communities, and Celia Kutz's training with global climate change activists, and Diane Tran's formation of Minnesota Rising and reshaping leadership in the state, and Lance Hagelin's building systems that enable people with disabilities to find caregivers. And I also want to surrender to the humor in situations and the absurdity, which I hope I see when you laugh with me at how hard I'm trying to surrender. And I felt that shift when Dylan Skybrook reminded our Innovation Lab team that we're just planning a 3-hour workshop, not saving the world, which he had to do many times. So I want to close, before we shift into some conversation, with a few questions. And then after that, I think that Myron's going to lead us, facilitate some response and reflection. So for you, what does it look like to surrender to the deepest source of life? How would you like to surrender to community? In what ways do you choose to be used in the transformation of systems? And when can we laugh together next about our clumsy attempts to surrender to life?